going to try to contain myself because there's so many facets of this fraud. And then how the establishment is calling themselves victims. They're now saying in The Guardian that the climate skeptics with these emails are persecuting good scientists when they're in their own emails talking about how they were persecuting people with government power, how they were blocking FOIA requests, how they were destroying scientific debate and blockading people publishing their science. I mean, this is a rigged club of crooks, and we're going to talk about bringing them to criminal justice. Also, research by Dr. Tim Ball in these emails. John P. Holdren, the eugenicist, is all over these emails, helping coordinate things. This is huge. Okay, Dr. Tim Ball,
well,
you've got the...
was a few years ago, there were two, in fact, they're both still active, Willie Soon and Sally Baliunas, both at Harvard, and they were doing first-class research. They're both solar physicists, and they were doing first-class research. Now, the key thing was the medieval warm period, and they had to get rid of that because they were saying that the 20th century was warmest ever, when in fact just 1,000 years ago it was even warmer than now. And Soon and Baliunas had extensive research proving it. And so, of course, they had to get rid of the medieval warm period, which they did through the hockey stick and Michael Mann and that scandal, but they had to also denigrate Soon and Baliunas. And there's a series of emails in there which Michael Mann is sending to the group, the CRU gangsters, from John Holdren, and Mann says, John thinks you'll be entertained by this exercise. And what it was that Holdren had a series of breakfast meetings in which he sent out information ahead of time, and they debated how wrong Soon and Baliunas were and how right Michael Mann was. And of course, Holdren, using that power that he had, and by the way, he was in the Teresa and Kerry Heinz, and we know all about their connections, that he was in that chair at Harvard. And so Baliunas, and it's about a few years ago, she was on some of our advisory committees on the skeptic side, and all of a sudden, we didn't hear from her. We finally contacted her, and she said, look, basically, I've been under attack here. I've got to step aside. And she also disclosed some of the personal attacks as a woman and as a redhead that were just absolutely outrageous. So this was going on within Harvard, and of course Holdren is very, very proud of what he did.
Let me stop you. Give us details of what she told you, because that's an article that needs to be written to show how they persecuted women and scientists and used intimidation, because they talk about that in some of the other emails, how to intimidate, how to cut funding, how to not let people publish their reports. Let's cover that in a moment. But first, let me ask you this question.
Yeah.
Over and over again, they've been proven that they're lying. They're more polar bears, not less. Polar bears are the best swimmers. They're not drowning. They hunt on ice packs. They're not drifting. They're going to die. They show school kids the Arctic and Antarctic contracting in the summer. They don't explain that it gets big again in the winter. They've been caught lying with the carbon dioxide heat graph, having carbon dioxide coinciding with the heat, not coming after it several hundred years, as you know. Hundreds and hundreds of frauds they've been caught in, but now... before they could deny they were caught or say it was an accident or have a debate about it. Now they've been caught red-handed in these emails at the top climate facility, the UN sites, as you know, Dr. Ball being a top climatologist. How big of an issue is it to have them red-handed in the code, the computer code, with notes on how they do the fraud, and then having them in the emails how they know it's getting colder, but they're going to lie? I mean, is this not the holy grail? You called it an atomic weapon against their lies.
Oh, absolutely. And of course, it isn't just the people, the CRU, the Climatic Research Unit, and Phil Jones. See, now, Phil Jones is the guy who put out that number of temperature increase of 1 degree Fahrenheit, which Gore talks about in his movie. Okay, Jones has consistently refused to disclose how he produced that number. Warwick Hughes wrote to him from Australia an email, and Jones came back and said, we spent 25 years getting these numbers. Why should we share it with you when all you want to do is find something wrong?
And you talk about that in Fall of the Republic. Before this even came out, you pointed at Jones.
Yeah, exactly. now. But beyond that, Jones, Mann, Keith Briffa, and by the way, the person that really started it all is Tom Wigley. He's the eminence grise behind all of this, and I've watched him manipulate and control for 30 years, and he started at the Climatic Research Unit. He's now at NCAR in Boulder, and he's the grandfather. He's the go-to guy when they say, what should we do about this? How should we deal with this? You can see that in the emails. But more important, Alex, is that these people control totally the IPCC. And, of course, the IPCC is the authority that all world governments quote and go to. It's the basis of Kyoto. It's the basis of the Copenhagen thing. It's the argument for carbon credits and that whole scam. So it isn't just the scandals within that academic unit. And I've said many times, and I think I said it to when I was interviewed by your group, that there's two responsibilities as a scientist. You've got the responsibility in the laboratory. These guys weren't even meeting those responsibilities, as we now know. But when you go public and say that your science is legitimate and should be the basis of policy, there's a whole new set of responsibilities kick in, and they didn't meet those either. In fact, they deliberately thwarted them. So it's on two completely different levels. But the first thing that we got to do is we got to shut down the IPCC. It's got to go.
Absolutely. We have the top scientists interlaced with the UN climate study group, and you also study them individually. They're all globalists. They're all pro-New World Order. They're all socialist. Yep. They all want to cut human resources. They all want one-child policies. This is a very sick group, and studying them separate from the climate debate, studying them being persecuted by them, you're one of the first people they singled out because as a top climatologist, you were effectively countering them. What type of individuals are these people?
Well, as you said, and by the way, the University of East Anglia, where the CRU is located, and I had the privilege of dealing with Hubert Lamb, who's the father of climatology of the modern era. He helped me with my doctoral thesis. I mean, he'd be turning in his grave. But it was set up there. The University of East Anglia, which, by the way, has been complicit in blocking freedom of information requests, as has the United Kingdom Met Office. So this thing permeates through government. But the University of East Anglia was set up under the Harold Wilson socialist government in Britain, and it is considered the most left of all the left-wing universities in Britain. So this was a perfect place for this CRU thing to fester into what it's become. And, of course, the person that there's two sides to it, of course. There's the political side and the science side. Now, the guy that put those two together is our old friend Maurice Strong. And, of course, Maurice Strong, I think, is hiding out in China right now because the U.S. government want him for his involvement with Kofi Annan in the oil for food in Iraq thing. But Maurice Strong was the one that set up the United Nations Environment Program. And he made a statement 30 years ago that he said, isn't the problem for the problem for the planet are the industrialized nations? Isn't it our responsibility to get rid of them? And I want your audience to think about how would you do that? If you consider the industrialized nations like an engine in a car, and that's a very good analogy because fossil fuels and energy are critical to them, how would you go about doing that? You'd say, okay, I can stop the engine by shutting off the energy supply. And as you see that happening, and the impacts on energy, but the public would scream right away. We saw that when the fuel prices went up. Everybody's angry immediately. So you really can't do that. But if you say, look, the byproduct, the exhaust of this engine, and you can stop an engine by plugging the exhaust. So if you say, look, the exhaust of this industrialized nations or this car is CO2, and it's destroying the global climate and destroying the planet, then you can point at, this evil industry, this horrible industrial complex, and this whole free market thing, we've just got to shut it down. It's destroying the planet. That's why CO2 became the focus, even though it's an absolute minuscule part of the total complexity that is weather and climate. And of course, Maurice Strong set about to do this. Now, in a book called The Cloak of Green by Elaine Dewar, who, by the way, started to write a book praising all the environmentalists in Canada, and as a good journalist, the more she dug, the more she discovered that these people were more corrupt than the corporations they were attacking. And 20% of that book is devoted to Strong. And she said to him, if you've got these ideas, why don't you run for politics? He probably, the only honest statement in his life, said, well, you can't do anything as a politician. He said, I'm going to go to the UN, and there I can get all the money I want and not be accountable to anybody. And that's precisely what he did. He set up with Kofi Annan, and he became the senior advisor, and he set up the United Nations Environment Program, and a subset of that was the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change.